Hello my loves and welcome back to my channel. If you are watching this on the Greek City Times YouTube, welcome. We are so glad to have you here. If you are watching this from my personal channel, hello. In today's video, I have the great pleasure of interviewing Dr. Sabine Hazan. Now, Dr. Hazan is a world-renowned gastroenterologist from California, and she is the creator of the world first ProgenaBiome. So this is a world first research laboratory where they test genetic sequencing, and they also test like the gut microbiome. And so Dr. Hazan is a firm believer that disease can only be understood through precision medicine by focusing on the individual and the changes within. Oh my God. So what I learned throughout this whole interview was that she really believes, and that's kind of reiterated by that comment there, that when it comes to treating GI symptoms, one size does not fit all. It does not. So that's what kind of sets her apart from every other GI specialist that I've spoken to so far. So Dr. Hazan really took me through topics like irritable bowel syndrome, how you can't just cure it overnight. It kind of takes trial and error and a lot of patience. The importance of keeping a food diary, which I think is pretty cool. I've never had a GI doctor tell me to keep a food diary. And we briefly touched on how the carnivore diet may not be a cure for your GI problems. Now, I know that I have done the carnivore diet and it has helped me, but I want to remain open to the possibility that it may not be a cure for everyone. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. As usual, if you have enjoyed this, give it a big thumbs up, and I hope you learned a thing or two. So enjoy, guys. So welcome, and I want to thank you very much for coming on. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
So I'm a gastroenterologist, and I've been doing clinical research for pharmaceutical companies for a long time, almost 2 decades, actually probably a little bit more than
20
decades.
years.
Yeah. So I started at University of Florida with doing research, and my first clinical trial was for Crohn's disease with a drug called Remicade. And Remicade, brought on other drugs and other protocols. And over the years, I started doing so many different protocols for so many different conditions, because research is research, that I landed as known in the world of clinical trials as the queen of C. diff, which is a bacteria that people get from eating antibiotics. And so C. diff brought on clinical trials on fecal material, microbiome
That's
pills.
right. Yep.
And so that came into my desk, and I started doing the first clinical trial on the microbes in a capsule. And I started seeing what was the difference between the capsule and what we were doing, in real life, and noticed that there were some differences, and definitely the capsule wasn't working as well as the microbiome transplant. And that's what I'm going to call it, because I think people have had enough of fecal transplant hearing it. So it's microbiome transplant. And so when we transplant, these microbes, and then we see something changes, right? A person's growing hair, a person's arthritis is improving, their psoriasis is improving, their chronic urinary tract infections, their, a patient with metastatic cancer I had, and it helped her prolong her life by giving her transplant that sustained her gut, and therefore allowed her to survive or support, chemotherapy. So when all these cases happen and you see something change, you say something's in the microbiome. What are we doing? And so I started sending my stools before and after fecal transplant to different labs, and I got different results. And that opened up the whole can of worms, if you want to call it, to me, where I started asking all these questions. Well, first of all, we're in the microbiome space. We're putting, microbes in capsules. We don't know where they're landing. We don't know whether they're landing in the stomach and messing up the stomach or the small bowel or the colon. We don't understand the microbiome. We don't understand what we're doing when we're doing microbiome transplant as GI doctors, right? Let alone what do we do? Because people have asked me, I had a company that does analysis of microbes and analysis of fecal material, and said, I don't understand why you don't just put microbes and fecal material in capsules and treat all the autistic children out there. And I said, well, that would be great if we knew what we were doing, but our intent is not to kill, it's to heal and do no harm. And so
the Hippocratic Oath. That's
absolutely.
right.
And so that brought on the interest to open up ProgenaBiome. And so ProgenaBiome, it stands from progenity, progena, from your genes to your biome, because I think when we look at a human being's disease, it's not only the genetics, it's also the microbiome.
Wow, that's incredible. Wow. Okay. So can you tell us a little more about ProgenaBiome? Now, you mentioned fecal transplants. I know that Professor Thomas Barodi was a big endorser of the transplant. And I don't want to, talk too much about, feces, but I really feel as though from what you just said, that it really makes a big difference in people that have got even cancer, which I find is incredible.
Well, and that's the future, right? So we all saw as GI doctors that microbiome transplant worked and that it was doing some things, but we also saw that it was doing other things, right? So the same thing that improves arthritis can cause arthritis, right? Yeah. The same thing that improves cancer in a way could cause cancer. We don't know. So, we were just tapping. And so my goal, because I had all these questions, was to assemble all the doctors around the country. And so I created the Biome Squad with the interest of saying, hey, we're the Biome Squad. We do microbiome transplant. Let's all talk at a meeting about what we're seeing. Let's discuss our experiences. And let me look at the microbiome before and after transplant to see what changes. Yeah. And so that was really the whole purpose of ProgenaBiome, was really what is changing when you have a patient that has Alzheimer's, you do microbiome transplant using his wife's feces, and then he remembers his daughter's date of birth. Wow. What changes? What causes that, right? And I always felt that if you attain a cure and you know what the patient looks like at the baseline, you're going to know what changed in the microbiome. So I had those stool samples, and I have those stool samples, and I started creating an assay that basically told me the story. And it did. It basically told me what happened to my patient, what changed in the microbiome that improved his Crohn's disease, that improved Dr. Barodi's patient's Crohn's disease, that improved my patient's Alzheimer's. So, and I realized that it was all individual, right? So it's very precise medicine. It's not something that you can just, let me take stools from an MIT student or from a Harvard student and give it to a person in Mexico or a person that lives in Oxnard or Ventura where I practice, right? It doesn't work that way. It's very precise, in my opinion. Some doctors have had amazing results with the biome banks that are selling these products, and some doctors don't have amazing results. And somewhere in the middle is precision medicine, right? Somewhere in the middle, you figure out, well, that didn't work and that worked. Where is the truth? And when you find the truth, it's amazing, because the truth is really reproducing the data, and not only reproducing the data, but showing another doctor that your data is reproduced, right? And I say this with research, all research needs to be valid, verified, and reproducible. If you don't have those three things, if it's not valid, you're doing nothing. If it's not verified by someone else to say, yes, 2 + 2 = 4, I took 2 cubes and I took another 2 cubes and they equal 4, and it's verified. And then I bring on another person, a third person, and say, can you reproduce that 2 + 2 = 4? Then at that point, it becomes legit science, and it becomes a science. And, we're entering a world where we can no longer do clinical trials with looking at a placebo versus a control. We have to be precise. We have to understand, why did the placebo work and not the drug? Was it because the patient microbiome was different and therefore could not tolerate the drug? And therefore, it's not that the drug doesn't work, it's just that it doesn't work for that patient. And so we have to be better at doing science and medicine. Because over so many years, and not only me, so many drugs have gone through the FDA and have failed, but have worked amazing. Gastroparesis, I remember doing a clinical trial, and the patients were doing amazing, but the drug never made it because some of the placebos were doing amazing too, right? But for those people who they resolved and cured, something changed in them. And for the people who resolved on placebo, well, something happened as well. So I think we need to understand.
So some 15% of the American population has irritable bowel syndrome, and it's twice as prevalent in females as males. I think they're very similar numbers in Australia, but I feel as though personally it's higher. I got irritable bowel syndrome a long time ago. I haven't really cured it. I've somehow lived my life around it, kind of thing. Do you think that a fecal transplant can actually cure or reverse irritable bowel syndrome?
Well, there's certainly, possibility of that, but you have to remember, irritable bowel syndrome is such a vast, array, right? So you have people that are deemed irritable bowel syndrome and they have endometriosis. You have people that have irritable bowel syndrome and they have bacterial overgrowth. You have people that are irritable bowel syndrome and actually are really Crohn's disease, right? And they're just not diagnosed. Some people, I've had a couple cases over the years deemed irritable bowel syndrome, and actually one of them was an ectopic stomach in the small bowel, another one was a carcinoid. So, sometimes, irritable bowel syndrome gets put into this array. And I think as women, we're sensitive as women, right? Women patients, women in general, we feel, the symptoms. And so that sensitivity, gets us tagged as irritable bowel syndrome, But sometimes there's something more. I cannot tell you how many young ladies I've diagnosed with endometriosis, and that was the problem, not irritable bowel syndrome. It's, or scar tissue behind the bowels. And so, there's such a difference. Now, of course, there is a percentage of the population that is that true irritable bowel syndrome, but is it irritable bowel syndrome or is it a visceral hyperalgesia, meaning oversensitive gut where the receptors are so sensitive that you're feeling every little thing and therefore you're having the symptoms, right? And then, or is it a bacterial dysbiosis, which is then becomes my world, right? In other words,
that's right.
There's a group of microbes in the gut that are essentially out of balance and they're just not functioning properly. And so therefore at that point, yes, fecal transplant could help those people. But you have to be careful that you're not swapping an irritable bowel syndrome case for an arthritis case, right? Irritable bowel syndrome for cancer. And that's a concern with fecal transplant or microbiome transplant, is really, fine-tuning, the microbes that you're going to be utilizing, because everything in life is risk versus benefits.
Yeah.
And everything in life has risks. And you don't want to swap something that's mild, even though debilitating, but it's mild, compared to something that's serious, like an arthritis or a deformity of the arthritis, or, the same thing that, and I always tell people, Dr. Colleen Kelly showed 2 cases of alopecia areata who grew hair after fecal transplant or after microbiome transplant they had C. diff. And, I always say the same thing that grows hair can lose hair. The same thing that improves arthritis can cause arthritis. So we have to be careful. We're at the beginning of all this. I see people rushing to England and the Bahamas to Tamon Clinic for fecal transplant, and it's not necessarily the solution. It's the same thing as, people rushing to have, their uterus removed, thinking, well, it's their fibroid causing the problem, and then it's not. It's really a gut problem, a dysbiosis. So you got to analyze everything, and I think, a lot of thing with irritable bowel syndrome is we tend to live in a society that's very type A. We drink a lot of coffee. We're on the go. We're anxious. We have to work 20 hours out of 24, or, and then it's difficult. The body does not stop. And so imagine a bottle that you're constantly shaking. You've got gas that builds up in there. Well, imagine your body is that, right? You're constantly shaking that body and you're stressed all the time and you're shaking it and bubbles build up. Well, that's going to cause you problems. So you got to calm down the system and you got to take a step back. And that's why I think I'm a big pusher of meditation, yoga, breathing, exercises, eating the right foods, comfort foods, keeping a diary of things that improve you and things that hurt you. Because really nutrition is key. So is it the future? Maybe.
Wow. Okay. So talking about food, there was a study that came out that I'm just going to read off here. It says that plants and legumes are a lot better than beef products at reducing inflammation of the small and large intestine. So why is this?
So I think a lot of beef is not properly, manipulated. I think it was 2 years ago, the FDA stopped the use of antibiotics in beef. So I think that played a huge, huge role. And in fact, we still see kids that are just yesterday, I had a kid with C. diff and ulcerative colitis. And the common story was he had a hamburger and he had a piece of lamb that didn't look right. So you wonder if that beef was vaccinated and probably, he's eating the vaccines with the meat. I mean, not vaccinated, I'm sorry, and got antibiotics.
Yep.
It's all like, get vaccinated. My mind is vaccinated.
That's all right.
Everywhere you go, every 10 minutes at Walmart, get vaccinated. So anyways, what I was saying is the beef gets antibiotics and the beef, gets antibiotics, and you're essentially eating the antibiotics of.
And that's why you get sick.
Yes. So but legumes in general, definitely, there's some benefit to it. There's definitely a lot of good studies out there on legumes and vegetables. My personal feel for, salads and everything, I like to make sure that I clean off everything, and I like to make sure it doesn't have any pesticides, because that's even worse for your gut. Here you are trying to eat a salad that's healthy, and in fact it's full of pesticides, and you're just aggravating your gut even worse.
Wow. Okay. So would you say the Mediterranean diet is the best diet at reducing inflammation in our guts?
So I think the Mediterranean diet is good for people in the that are living in those areas. I think it's not necessarily good for everybody.
Okay.
I don't think it's good for the Mexicans, because that's a different culture and a different microbiome there. I don't think it's good for Japanese. They have a different culture. They're used to, the rice and the Japanese food. Chinese, vice versa. So I think, every culture has a different microbiome, and every culture has a different reception to foods. So I think to generalize, we're definitely looking at that. We're looking at Japanese in America versus Japanese in Japan, Chinese in China versus Chinese in China, to see what's different in their microbiome and to see what has changed and what causes disease. We're certainly seeing a lot more autism in children in India and other countries. And so one wonders if maybe there's something in the food supply or in the microbiome that gets transferred that causes that. So
that's quite interesting that you actually said that, because there's this craze going around now. I'm sure you've heard of it, the carnivore diet. It's everywhere I look. There's a new carnivore cured person. I can see you shaking your head.
I know, it's like we're all different. How could we possibly eat the same foods? We all
Exactly.
have
So
different fingerprints. How can we eat the same foods? It just
that's my question.
boggles my
Exactly.
mind. And anytime somebody is doing that, they're selling you something. It's marketing, right? They're selling you that, the beef or the farm or, or the new probiotic or something. So I feel like people know in their gut what they tolerate and what they don't tolerate.
Yeah.
I think if you're eating 10 donuts a day and you've got a problem, then maybe the 10 donuts is not a good idea, right? We know what causes us problems and indigestion. My favorite question is when people come to my office and they're like, every time I eat corn, I have to go to the bathroom. And well, why are you eating the corn? Clearly,
Take it out.
Take it out. It would have it saves you a GI consult. Why even go there, in my opinion? If you're drinking something or you're eating something that's affecting you, why do it? It's not essential to your life.
So then why? I've got to be entirely upfront. I tried the carnivore diet for 6 weeks. And then it just got to the point where my body could not handle it anymore. So I just came straight off it. But why is there this huge push towards a carnivore diet? I don't really understand it. And is it actually healthy for your body to just consume, I don't know, pork and eggs and cheese and beef and whatever, really? Is it?
I mean, if you want to have a heart attack and see my husband, the cardiologist, yeah, that's probably the right way. But I mean, I think it's a mistake to consume anything, in large amounts. And I think anything in moderation.
Yeah.
And I think your body knows when you've overdone it. Your body knows when you're craving something and you're sick. And we all know, right? We know that if we're eating a whole pizza, we're going to gain weight. You don't need the book to tell you how to lose weight. You just know that if you're eating a whole pizza, calories in, calories out. I mean, that's the way it is. We all could write the book on weight loss. We all could write the book on nutrition. So I think ultimately we all know what's good for us because it is individual. We all changed our diets. We've all become diversified in our foods because we're exposed to certain foods that we weren't exposed as a kid. I myself am from the Mediterranean diet, so that was my exposure. And then I came to America from Canada and from Europe, and basically started eating foods that I wasn't used to. I never had eaten Mexican food, and I never had eaten sushi too much, and that didn't really settle. Of course, with time, you get adapted to that and changes. But of course, there's a variety of foods that certain people just can't tolerate, and they just need to know that that's not the way they should go. If you start having symptoms from foods, then stop the behavior.
Stop the food.
Stop the foods. I mean, you noticed it yourself when you ate. Say, I did the same thing. I did ketogenic diet one time, and I ended up
about keto.
Yeah, I started having reflux because what did it do? It weakened my esophageal valve, and then acid started building up, and I started having horrendous reflux. So I was losing weight, but I was having reflux symptoms. I'm like, well, I don't want to kill my esophagus and then get esophageal cancer, so I better stop that ridiculousness because in reality I did lose the weight, but the problem is it didn't sustain the weight loss, and that's the key. So it's like, you gotta readjust your foods, readjust if it's a question of weight loss, and everything we put in has consequences.
That is so true. So speaking about ketogenic diet, so again, from what you said before, you think that it's not one size fits everybody. And do you think that a keto diet can, because there are heaps of people out there that claim that keto can cure irritable bowel syndrome, PCOS, insulin resistance. But from what I'm kind of hearing, that isn't the case.
So if that was the solution, every doctor would be recommending it for every single patient.
Yep.
Every patient, that has a problem has tried those, right? So the fact that it's not universal tells you exactly what I've been saying from the beginning. We're
Yep.
all different.
We're all
If we're different, how can we possibly use the same pill or the same diet? And so for those people who it's working, great for them, that worked. But for the rest, and they tried it and it didn't work, then stay off that train.
Okay.
Get off that train is what I'm going to say.
Get off it quick.
Right.
Which foods should we be avoiding? Gluten, processed sugars.
So corn is probably my least favorite food. There's no benefit of corn whatsoever. That's the main food that I'm not a fan of. Everything else really in moderation. Yes, processed sugars, processed meat, not a good thing. Processed cheese, all these, foods with tons of additives and everything.
Yep.
That's not really good. And sugar and also colored foods, not a good thing. Also, if you're going to buy foods, make sure that it's foods that where the farm where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we think organic, and then you turn in the back of the bag and you see made in Taiwan or Thailand, mm-hmm. and you go, well, I don't know if that's organic. I haven't really seen the farm where it's at, right? So I think there's a lot of deception in the food industry where we think something is organic and good for us, and it's actually not. You look at the salmon, for example, and you see these salmon that are like from the farm where there's 1,000 fish swimming together, and you can imagine they're swimming in their microbiome, not to be graphic. But if you look at that piece of salmon, it's extremely red, it looks amazing, but actually, it's got a lot more fat and a lot of color additives. So that's not something I would, I prefer the salmon from deep ocean because
yep.
then, it's wild, etc. So I think on the whole, that's my impression. I like to know where my food comes from, my farm. There's a huge movement right now on social media. I don't know if you saw, of people gardening at home. There's like a lot. I love that.
Everybody is now. Everyone is.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's the way it should be, because it's like, first of all, you get to play with the dirt, which is great for your microbiome because you're bringing in microbes that you're playing with. You're one with nature. And then secondly, what you put in. There's no preservatives. There's no toxins. There's no pesticides because they're grown in your house, under your roof, and you know what you put in. And it's a different taste.
Yeah,
strawberries that you buy at the grocery store and the strawberries you buy, you plant are completely different. The tomatoes are amazing when you grow them at home versus the ones you buy in the grocery store. Every time I taste a strawberry or a tomato, I know it's been manipulated somehow because it doesn't taste like what a tomato or a strawberry tastes like.
Should taste like, wow.
All for that movement.
Wow, okay. So which foods and also supplements should we be consuming just to improve our microbiome as a whole?
So the first thing I'm going to say is vitamin D.
Okay.
I'm a huge proponent of vitamin D. Vitamin D has shown to improve, to actually prevent, or not prevent, but at least to help with colon cancer. So, we see a lot of, colon cancer with vitamin D deficiency. So definitely vitamin D is a plus. I give it to all my inflammatory bowel disease patients. I give it to all my patients in general. I'm very big on supplementing the vitamin D. Making sure you have a multivitamins. If you're over a certain age, you need to supplement your calcium and your magnesium. So, the vitamins are very important. Again, with the vitamins, you got to make sure that they're coming from the right place and
mm-hmm.
that they're proper vitamins and that they've been tested. And, I'm trying to push the movement of FDA kind of overlooking the vitamins, because too often we're seeing these vitamins over the counters, and they're actually either contaminated or they have stuff that's not that shouldn't be in there. You look at vitamin C and then you ask yourself, is it really the pure vitamin C, or is there other stuff that was contaminated in there? And so, making sure the right companies and the right supervision, and that it's a GMP company, et cetera, that's developing that. So I think that's one. Two, probiotics. In general, probiotics, I like things that are in yogurt, natural foods. I'm not a pill person because I don't know if the probiotics that are in the pill, first of all, are the real probiotics, the real bacteria, the real microbes, or is it dead bacteria, that gets into your colon, it's dead. What does a dead bacteria do to a live colon? That's the main question. So, be asking the questions. And again, if you're taking a probiotic and you're feeling gassy or not feeling well, that's not for you. So just stop it. So you can do, anything as a test trial is not going to hurt you, but things chronically being used that are wrong for you and don't sit properly is not a good thing.
I see. Okay. So vitamin D. What about vitamin C?
Vitamin
Is that
C,
important?
it's got to be careful for people that have like kidney problems, because they can end up having, kidney, especially people that have renal failure, is not a good idea to over supplement. Vitamin C, also gastritis patients, it's too sensitive for them. Okay. So if you're going to do a vitamin C, make sure, it's the coated vitamin C. Just to make sure that it absorbs properly and that not too much, but that's one. In a time of COVID, I like to push zinc because
that's right. Yeah,
zinc. So because it blocks, the entrance of the virus, and in general any virus. But of course, don't overdo it. 25 milligrams, is enough. Because anytime you give too much of something, you lose something. So if you overdo it with zinc, you're going to lose your copper, and then you need your copper. So you got to keep the balance going with these vitamins supplements.
I understand. Okay. My last question is, what advice do you have for people who have been told that they have irritable bowel syndrome? And as you were talking before, it can be anything. It can be from like this to that. And they've been suffering for 5 to 10 years. What should they be potentially looking at?
So the first thing is making sure they have a complete workup that is sure.
Okay, blood work?
Well, blood work, an evaluation by GI doctor, if they're primary care doctor, if they're still suffering, and it depends, right? Irritable bowel syndrome is irritable bowel syndrome, abdominal pain, irritable bowel syndrome, diarrhea, irritable bowel syndrome, gas, or irritable bowel syndrome, constipation. So what symptoms are they having? If they're not getting better and the primary cares, haven't helped them, then it's time to see a GI doctor to make sure this is what we're talking about. Certainly a good workup is important. Okay. And then, doing a diary. I think the best thing that has helped me, and I always tell my patients, keep a diary for me. Give me the time that you ate, what food you ate, and when your symptoms occurred. Because the digestive tract is very simple. It starts in the mouth, it ends up in the rectum. At any point where the food gets lodged is the problem. So if your food is stuck in the stomach somewhere, then you potentially have an idea of what's going on, right? If you're having problems, in the left upper quadrant, and what time you ate the food at, what food is the culprit. So I think my best thing that has helped me over the years is a diary that patients have kept with symptoms, and then it tells the story. I'll give you an example, and the reason I'm not a fan of corn, so many of my patients, or lentils, sometimes patients will come in and they'll write their diaries, and inevitably you see they had at 2:00 in the afternoon, they had corn. At 7:00 at night, they're having GI problems. And it's symptoms. Always, so it's always something like that. And so essentially I say, well, there's your culprit, you circle it. So I think people can just, do a simple diary themselves and find the similarities of the food that is affecting them.
So a food diary.
Food diary, very important. The second thing that's very important is making sure you have enough fiber. right, in your diet. So if you're not having the fiber from foods, and I wrote the book, I don't know if you know, with the bad title, Let's Talk SHIT. And
I've
so
seen it briefly.
yeah, so in there I put some diets because one of my topic is gas price. One of my chapters is gas prices because people have gas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I gave a couple of examples of foods that you could eat and recipes that you can eat in there because clearly, even though we're all different, there's certain things that do cause people that are sensitive problems, and so it's important to know.
So where can we actually find this book?
Amazon.com. ProgenaBiome. So www.prognabiome.com.
Okay. I think I've got like 20 more questions, but time has caught up. So I really want to thank you so much for coming on, and enjoy I think it's evening there, right?
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.